All right, welcome to May. Weather's now getting cold. All right, so this month I was finishing off one of my previous speed paintings because I can never quite get anything done in 3 hours. You guys all voted it was a three-way tie between three of the previous speed paintings, which always makes me happy because it tells me that you guys like everything that I'm doing so far. At least that's how I'm gonna read that. So I went with the Bard on the bar as the one I wanted to paint today um, because this one posed the greatest challenge for me when I attempted to start this, in that I haven't painted a scene in a very long time. So what I'm doing right now is I'm cleaning up the mess of layers that I made with the knowing that I'm going to have to actually tidy this up. So what you can see on my layers palette is that I've actually broken the picture up into sections and I've created masks for each of those sections. So I sort of selected each area as best I could, masked it off so that when I paint in that folder, so you can see if I painted in the barred folder, um, it wouldn't go outside of the mask of the character. So the mask itself might need a bit of tweaking. There might be some rough edges to it. But yeah, it sort of helps me contain my painting. So what I decided to focus on first with the notion of actually trying to get this to a polished finish is working on the background, because in the last video I did actually get started on Trixie herself, so her face looks really good. So I thought, let's see if we can get the background up to something similar. So at the moment, the bard has her own layer, the drunk has their own layer, and so does the barkeep, as well as the foreground shadowy figures. So everything else is on the bottom of the stack. So you might see sometimes if I'm painting beneath the tail of my bard, my tiefling bard, none of the paint actually touches the tail. It only paints beneath it. So that's the beauty of masking. One of those things that if you're actually organized, it saves you a butt ton of grief. And I'm usually too lazy to do that and then regret it. So I went out of my way to sort of sort myself out and try and do that. So I've started in that corner up there, on the opposite side to the bard, working on those roof beams. So I'm doing a lot of color picking of the environment because I really liked the color palette I developed, but it was just sort of about painting in cleanly what was there instead of sort of roughly insinuated sections. Now I'm concentrating on the structure at this point because I've realized that I'm going to have to do the lighting as its own layer and I didn't plan for that. So I'm sort of pretending that, oh yeah, there'd be a bit of cast lighting from these glowing orbs in between these beams, sort of bouncing off of it, and I'll redo the orbs over the top later. And I'm really liking how this is feeling at the moment. I've got like my one trusty brush that sort of gives me that painterly look, where I'm not going for super hard edges. I sort of want stuff that's a little bit soft but textured. So if any of you guys want this brush, I'm happy to send it to you and you can play around with it. One of my artist friends sent it to me, and I've ended up very much painting with just this, a hard round and a soft brush, and sometimes a speckle brush. I don't use a whole lot. So now I'm sort of painting around that beer jug, which is in the foreground layer. So you just sort of see what's left of the clipping mask, if that makes sense. I'm cleaning up everything underneath. So I want to insinuate lots of bottles, and I liked all the like splashes of color I had in there that kind of made you think there was lots of different colors of glass. I'm just sort of concentrating on giving each of those blobs a form and a bit of a reflected shadow into the shelf, so that you can sort of start to make out what they might be. But I don't want to go like super duper rendered because otherwise your eye's going to look at the bottles and not at the main features of the characters in the picture. So it's sort of a hierarchy of detail. Yeah, so I'm sort of smoothing out that back area because I really don't need a lot going on there. I know when I first planned out this scene, I sort of had a bunch of like lanterns and like flaming wall sconces and other people back here, but it's too hard, it's too complicated. Best to sort of just get those sort of shadows and shapes fading away into the background and not competing too much. It's very easy to overcomplicate your picture with too many colors and too much detail. Um, Best to pick your battles where you can. All right, so yeah, so as you can see, I'm sort of darting all over the shop a little bit. I'm now trying to smooth out the front section of the bar. I'm thinking about the way the materials are sort of turning. So if you've seen any kind of bar, tabletop, there's always a lip. You got to make sure that that stands out. Um, like you're essentially thinking in 3D, which can be a bit tricky for some people. I know it's taken me a long time to sort of wrap my head around that and think about how things might be affected in a 3D space and then to try and paint that. And then you add lighting in, and that's a whole nother level. Really, I'm just making this stuff up. So yeah, I'm working on the roof beams near Trixie's head. So now you can really see that like I'm just painting behind her. I'm adding in some more ropes because I really liked how the ropes turned out in that first wall beam that I painted. So I thought rinse, repeat, get a bit of consistency going on. I'm doing a lot of directional brushstrokes to try and give you an impression of like the wood. Uh, and I think it kind of works. Obviously, the faces that are closer to the light are going to be warmer, and I'm trying to sort of cool off the areas of wood that are falling away from the areas of light. And mostly just trying to make sure that the structures all make sense, that they don't just stand out as awkward or warped or strange in perspective. Admittedly, in the first video I did this, I spent a lot of time just trying to make sure the perspective was okay, and I don't want to lose that in doing the final details of the paintings. So this like formless blob that I've got over here behind Trixie's coattails is gonna be another oak barrel, like the little tiny one on the counter. I've just left it blue for now, because I was moving on to something else. And because I like that it's light, but I think I probably end up painting it brown later. So, um, yeah, I can tend to rush things. Oh gosh, yeah, my throat's getting a bit croaky. As I said, it's getting cold, which means change of season, flus are going around. I seem to be holding strong this year, which is a nice change. Um, all right, so I'm just sort of cleaning up the bottom of the bar, thinking about the shadows of like maybe that bar kind of overhangs a fair bit, so the shadows underneath are going to be quite dark. I think I move on to one of the characters soon. I spent a good deal of time just messing around with this background because obviously you want it to really fit. And that's where I'd done the least amount of work when I was doing this the first time around. I was really concerned with the composition and with the main character working. So I dropped another gradient between the bard and the background, just to soften those background information, and it's not, again, competing with her too much because she's quite in the foreground away from those bottles. So that's more of a compositional thing. Started painting into the foreground, so you can see in my layers palette I've moved over to the foreground folder, and I'm working on giving a little depth to my shadows. So I started out with just a bunch of roughly hewn silhouettes, knowing that I wanted like layers in the foreground to give you depth. But something I wanted to make sure I did was give the shadows some form so that they weren't just like cutouts. But I get back to that later. I think I was getting a bit frustrated with trying to do the beer in the glass. So So I've switched over to the Bard now. Um, and I know a couple of times, or quite a few times, I had to go to the mask itself and just clean up the edges of the mask and smooth that out. If I had done this in a more sort of professional sense, I would have focused on making sure the masks were perfect before I actually got into doing the nitty gritty of the painting, because then that meant my outer edge didn't need to be changed. But in this, I'm still sort of refining all of those things at once, like a glorious balancing act. So with cleaning up Trixie here, I'm just sort of working my way down from top to bottom, smoothing out any of the bits that feel really rough, adding extra highlights, cleaning up sort of any muddy colors or undefined shapes. One of my favorite things to do at the moment is putting in seam stitching. I feel like that always adds a nice little tertiary element of detail. I also have some Tim Tams sitting here and I really want to eat them, but I'm mindful that I'm not going to record crunching noises while I'm doing this for you guys. So that's my reward for when I'm done. These two Tim Tams tempting me, and so I'm playing with them. Anyway, back to the non-confectionery stuff. So as you see, I've worked my way down a bit. Um, I'm focusing on the way all the elements of her costume overlap. So again, as I'm cleaning up the colors, I'm thinking about that, and thinking about where there would be cast shadows, particularly with sort of like right now I'm looking at the legs. You know, the foreleg is going to be casting shadow over the back leg. The little sort of garter ropes are going to be casting shadow on the fabric. Making sure that the bits on her belt are stacking realistically. That was something that I spent a bit of time on. All the loops on the belt buckles, they need to sort of shadow themselves and overlap in the right way, because that gives it sort of realism. Whew, running out of voice already. It's been a long weekend. Went to the medieval fair this weekend. So obviously I generally I do the recording of these videos and then I do the audio afterwards. So in this I did this recording last a week prior to me doing this audio. Um, yeah, I'm really excited to try and finish this piece because as I said earlier, it's been a long time since I've tried to do a full scene of anything that had, you know, character, background, characters interacting. It's quite an ambitious and complicated thing to do. And the last time I tried to do anything like that was part of my master's degree. So the fact that I've been able to do this through having you guys vote on what you wanted to see me do, and encourage me to paint stories and characters like this, it's a really fantastic self-assurance thing to get through and go, yeah, I can do that. I thought I could, but I wasn't sure or I wasn't confident enough to give it a go. Well, because I've ended up doing this for you guys, I've turned out something I don't think I would have motivated myself to do otherwise. And it's easy to say this is one of my favoriteest things I've done in a long time. I love the vibrancy, I love the personality. I really want to try and do more in the way of scenes because they're challenging. I want all the little elements to be working in the background. Like even when I finished this piece, as you'll see later on, I would have wished I did more with the signs, more little, you know, world building elements. But this is a great start. So I'm just sort of fleshing out her leg armor, which I'm never really super happy with. What I should have done in retrospect is pulled out some actual armor reference and looked at how the highlights and shadows actually work on plate armor. That's something I've been meaning to do studies for a long time. So maybe in upcoming sketchbooks you'll see me do some armor plate studies. Like I said, having just gone to the medieval fair this weekend, I got to see lots of my friends get kitted up in armor and beat each other with weapons, which always inspires me to paint more. Just cleaning up the violin now. So I've just done some sort of straight white lines in there to actually get the strings looking nice, clean up the hand, get some nice highlights going on there. You see, sometimes I leave notes for myself on my work so I don't forget. So when I was cleaning up the file, when I started painting, um, I did have a separate group for just the lighting with like speckled lighting and stuff that I accidentally flattened down. So I need to go back to my old file and copy all the speckled lighting over and then build on that. So I'll get to that later. Yeah, what am I on now? I'm so sorry, guys. This is a longer than normal video because I really wanted to push this out. Um, so in the end, I think because this recording covers about 4 to 5 hours, previous recording covered about 6, and I reckon there's probably an hour or so that didn't end up getting recorded. This is probably about 12 hours worth of production, so like a full-blown illustration is not quick. And I definitely could have spent more time refining this than where I end up leaving it off. Here you go. So this is me copying over my little lighting effects now. So I actually did those with a speckle paintbrush and using my layer modes. I'm now adding some gradients in just to sort of make those lighting layers match. Okay, yes. Now on to the drunk. One of the very first things I thought was like, what should the color palette be of this character? I didn't want it to, again, dominate away from the main character in this scene, but I wanted to stand out a little bit more than the rest of it. You know, walk in the line. So I thought I like to try and think of variety in my characters, and I was like, right, I want to put dark skin on this elf. That's something that I just said, yep, that's going to happen. This is going to be a dark skinned elf. Which meant, okay, what's a nice contrast? White hair, of course. So it's turned this elf into a little bit of a drow. And I decided to go with fairly neutral colored armor so that again, doesn't sort of scream, pay attention to me. But the red in the scarf is just enough to go, hey, I've got color on me, look at me. But it's from the background tones, if that makes sense. So the red and the purple I've picked from the background instead of being something that's super contrasty. Yeah, keeping it in line. I really like the added detail of like the beer kind of spilling out over the counter. That was something I had to sort of fix up in the mask because when I set up the mask, it was quite chunky and I had to sort of clean up the mask so it was really refined. Something like, I mean, if you guys are actually, I don't know if anyone listens to this, please tell me if you are listening to these and what you enjoy or what you might like to see. Because it feels like, well, I am quite literally talking to myself in a dark room. But yeah, if you'd like to see me do some like more in-depth exploration of layer masking and things like that, I be more than happy to. Obviously, so yep, so I moved on to the next character, the bartender, who is my hipster orc. I knew that. I also knew his apron would need to be darker so that it contrasted off of the light hair of the elf on the bar, because that was going to make it easier to read. Because obviously, if I had the elf a similar color and tonal value to the to the bartender, they would blend in and you'd have no sense of them actually being far away from each other. So now I'm zoomed in and gosh, that looks messy. But that's okay. Let's rough him in and hope he sort of fits. Just really, again, not trying to super detail him up so that he's sticks out like a sore thumb. I just want him to be filled in. Better than the silhouettes that I had before. I love that I have this little tuft of hair poking out, and his little like horn in the earring. It's great. Little things to entertain myself. So I liked the tuft of hair coming out of him. I added it to the drunk. Um, and now I'm just sort of trying to make sure there's enough shading between the two of them so that they don't get lost in each other. Um, so I'm using sort of gradients to help me with that. Helps build up some atmospheric distance. Gradients are my favorite thing. Gradients and layer masks, yeah. All right, so I think I now have to deal with the characters in the foreground because they're the only things that aren't colored in. And they really look like cardboard cutouts now. I feel like when I did finish painting the characters in the foreground, I was like, oh, it doesn't look like I've done that much. And then I used the history palette to go back and I go, oh wait, no, they were just fill shadows before. So yeah, so obviously I'm just trying to work on the beer. Again, the smart thing to have done would have been to look up some reference photos of what beer looks like with light shining through it in like a glass jug. I didn't do that. I just went, oh, I'll just keep mashing it around until it looks kind of alright. So yeah, I think it's possible. I probably could have done better if I looked at some actual photos. So if you're doing this sort of thing, go look at actual photos of things that you're trying to recreate because your brain doesn't always have the ability to make it up as accurately as you might think. At least not without a little research. So now I'm sort of filling in this dwarf at the front, and I love that he has a mohawk. And I decided it was going to be blue. With some like nice spiral tattoos. Again, thinking about his costume or her costume or their costume, the same way as I did with the drunken elf, is that I want this character to have some form, but I don't want their colors or details to compete with the main character. So I'm keeping them fairly neutral with just a little pop. So the mohawk was my good excuse for a pop of color, but the rest is all just warm grays and browns, um, so that it is not a competing color scheme. But it gives you form where we didn't have form before. That hand drives me nuts. I love that he's doing the devil horns up in the air, but I realized that I really didn't shape that hand out properly. So I have to go back to the mask and clean up the mask a little bit to try and get that hand feeling a little less, I don't know, manky. I don't think I ever quite got it right, but yeah, I'm playing a bit of a game between the background layer and the is the bit that I'm trying to clean up on the background layer or is it on the character? So that's me flipping back and forth for a little bit. Running out of voice. Again, should have looked up armor reference. Didn't. I'll do it next time. I say I'll always do it next time. I like that I brought a little bit of the pink lighting in because obviously these glowing orbs that are working for lighting are very pink. So I'm just like, yep, let's just add some sort of bounce light on this person because I imagine this person's like right up in the action. And then the final silhouette I've got is going to need to be further back, essentially above the dwarf. But I'll fix that. I'm just worrying about the dwarf right now. One thing at a time. Especially when you're dealing with something that's complicated, you've got to break it down. It was a real hard pick between doing this and the Genasi character, so I think I'll be doing the Genasi next month. Thankfully, it's just focusing on the character. But maybe after a little while, I'll pull out that poll again that this bard came out of, which was all the different RPG scenes. I'll have a go at another one. This picture I want to put onto my new business cards because I haven't updated my business cards since getting that new shiny logo. So part of my motivation for finishing this one is that this is the perfect business card painting. All right, so final silhouette. You know, some kind of orc, maybe, in a spiked helmet? Yeah, let's go with that. I just had to pick the first thing that came to mind. And they've got a tankard, which is slightly easier to deal with than a glass. Um, and again, just sort of building in the beer froth, which again, I should have looked at reference for. I didn't. I decided to just wing it. Funnily enough, if I'd looked at reference, it probably would have saved me time. Um, so now I'm looking at just how to shade the layers a little bit. Because now that I've put form and painting into those forward characters, I now need to sort of like darken them again. So, I'm giving some colored gradients around like the internal edges so that they're getting a bit of like bounce lighting, and then I'm like darkening the rest of them so that they fade back into the background. It's an awkward back and forth. How bright is too bright? How dark is too dark without losing like form and shadow? Like black is sometimes too much. You need to make it look like black. Yeah. Also blur filter, because why not? So yeah, I think I just when you saw the screen go black, I actually compressed the foreground shadows and blurred them, and then started painting over them again. So I sort of played a little bit with stuff that was in focus and out of focus in this image to see if it helped sell the whole idea. Not something I'm super familiar with yet. So I'm back doing some touch-ups on the drunk. I think at this point I decided to just do an overall cleanup pass of everything. It's like, all right, I'd separated everything out, I'd focused on each of the individual elements that needed tidying, and now I just am going for cohesion. Anything that's left is just going to be this absolute top layer of, all right, I'm going to go around and just do those bits and pieces that I feel really need a little bit of attention. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching.